Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a very large game with a lot of mysteries, and one of the central themes of Assassin's Creed is of course the idea of family. Now, one of the biggest mysteries in this game is of course a certain family, and today I wanted to discuss that. Now, just a disclaimer before we get started, because this is going to get pretty wild, so make sure you bring your thinking hats today. It's going to get deep. I just want to say I'm not trying to offend anyone's religion by discussing what I am discussing today. I was doing a lot of real-world religious research for this video to try and see some of the themes across various religions and put it in the lens of Assassin's Creed. Again, some of these real-world connections are something real that religious researchers agree on and have found, but that doesn't mean I'm here today to tell you that your religion is entirely fake or anything like that. Again, I'm just simply taking some of these loose ideas people have come up with and applying them to the series where they do make a bit more sense, just in the context of the events and the lore of this particular series. While I was taking these insane notes, which you guys can't see me right now, but I have 12 pages of handwritten notes in front of me about all of the insane things that I was researching about and trying to find out and make connections with. While I was doing that and tearing my mind into pieces, Access the Animus was doing the same thing except with the Isu language that was introduced in this game, and some of the translations he came up with not only gave me more ideas for this video, but also supported some of the ideas that I was trying to come across or coming up with on my own. And one of them is actually extremely central to the key focus of this video, and that is that Loki's family is the key. Now, you might be asking, how did you come up with that? Well, one of the translations on the collector's edition roughly comes to the family is the key. Now, there's a couple other interpretations you could take from that according to Access the Animus and what he was able to decode, but the family is the key is a viable one, and I think one that makes sense with what I'm about to present today. Now, of course, before we start any video, make sure you leave a nice, thick, and juicy like, and of course, if you enjoy content like this, then make sure you hit that big, red, sexy subscribe button right underneath the video. And as always, gotta shout out my channel members. Thank you guys so much. You guys help make these videos possible. If you want to join and get access to exclusive perks, make sure you check out the link in the description down below, or click that blue join button if it ever showed up. So I want to preface this by saying that this video is going to get a little bit wild, so any details you might want to hold on to in your head, because everything I'm going to try and keep this video to are the important details that I found and the important connections that I found, so I'm trying to make sure that everything I say in here actually matters and I'm not rambling off on anything pointless. So keep everything in mind. It's going to be some conclusions that I may mention, and then they'll come around and connect later. Anyway, let's jump on in. So first, let's examine Loki and Aletheia, considering they're the ones in charge of this family. Loki we don't know too much about. We know he's a trickster, and he knows he's extremely intelligent, so much so that even Odin is aware and recognizes just how smart Loki actually is. Now, I think this is also the first example of the abilities that this being has is actually metaphorical and not literal. Even though we see Loki turn into Freya in one of the mythological arcs, we know that he wouldn't actually have that ability. The Isu don't actually have magic. They're flesh and blood beings just like me or you. They just have a couple of more senses than we do, and they're able to do things that humans cannot conceive of doing simply because they created us intentionally to be that way. So I think Loki's ability to be a trickster, quote unquote, is really just his ability to hide in plain sight. Let's just say I think that makes the most sense in the context of this series. Now, aside from that, we know his wife Aletheia is the embodiment of truth, but I think if you look at the actual definition of her name in Greek, it's more so the truth behind reality and what is true beyond what the human eye can see or what you can see in regards to what you deem as reality. It's kind of confusing, but I think she's almost the antithesis of what Juno was, where they both almost want a new reality but in different ways, and it's a really cool metaphor for the larger assassin versus Templar conflict. Now, there is also an ancient Hebrew version of Aletheia's name, and I'm bringing this in because there are three religions that are the most major in this series so far have been the Greco-Roman religions, now the Norse religions, and then of course the Abrahamic religions, more specifically Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And her ancient Hebrew name means man's new covenant or deal with Yahweh through Jesus, which again has to do with a new reality for mankind. Now, this is interesting because some of the things that I found while doing research about this had to do a lot with Christianity, and in fact there's a lot of references references to Christianity in this game in regards to things like the Nephilim or the Archon, who are referenced by Brendan of Clonfirth when you're doing the kind of stone puzzles that you can find throughout the game. He mentions them quite a bit, and in fact in one of the translations that Access the Animus had, we can see an order being put in for humans by the Father, the Mother, and the Holy Voice, who are actually named, and these names are the names of Archons, including Yaldabaoth, or Yaldabaoth, however you say that name. He is considered the demiurge, or the evil god of the Old Testament, and so again we're kind of having these Old Testament themes going on here. And speaking of that, I want to head over to the Dead Sea Scrolls, because within them we can find some interesting ideas in regards to different entities and different beings, because the translations of the texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls are much older versions of the religious texts that we may have today. The ones today are considered the Masoretic texts. They're more common, and they were translated between the 8th to 10th centuries, so they would be translated around the time of Eivor, whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint text, which is considered more accurate, even though it's less common, were translated or created in the 3rd century BCE, so they're much older, much closer to what the original text would have said. One of the ones I want to look at is Deuteronomy 32:8, which in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I know they've been apparently proven to be a hoax, but so was the Voynich manuscript. That's still considered something in the Assassin's Creed universe to be real, so I'm going to say the Dead Sea Scrolls are as well. Now, this passage here says, "When the Most High divided the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the nations according to the number of the sons of God, and his people Jacob became the portion of Yahweh. Israel was the line of his inheritance." Now, there's a lot to take away from this. The Most High is in ancient Hebrew referred to as El, or Elyon would be the supreme God. But in the part that says the sons of God, that is often a translation from the ancient Hebrew that says Ben Elohim, which is the plural form of God, meaning the sons of God in the most literal translation. And then, of course, there is obviously that kind of sets these beings as lower than Elyon or El, the Most High. We also have Yahweh being referred to as a separate entity, and that Israel would be the line of his inheritance. Again, kind of an interesting little detail, and it sounds like why the rest of the sages who are from the Norse were reincarnated where they were. And then of course Loki is reincarnated in the Middle East as Bassam, joins the Assassins, which kind of fits his persona in a kind of way, but also he grew up in Baghdad, which that is east of Israel, or how it would have been known in the ancient times as the land of Canaan. And again, it kind of comes back to Aletheia, because if we look at Loki, he is actually a Jotun. He's not actually an Aesir. He was adopted by Odin, but when Odin goes to Jotunheim, it's all the Greco-Roman gods. So we know that those gods had the most influence and the most power in that particular area. So likely the Mediterranean is Jotunheim. Just to kind of go off topic a little bit here, there was a Reddit post that tried to fit each of the realms to different geographical locations on Earth. Darby McDevitt did actually comment on that post and say that the only one that they got right was that North Africa was Muspelheim, but the rest of them were wrong, so we don't really have a clear picture as to which exact areas of the world each of the gods may have had as their realms per se. I guess you could almost assume that the Jotunheim area would have been in the Mediterranean kind of area where the Romans and the Greeks would have been. That's where their area of influence would have been. And since Loki is kind of a part of that, and you go over to Israel, and that kind of area was on the edge of the Roman Empire, so on the edge of that influence, and Loki doesn't have a counterpart on the other side within the Greco-Roman pantheon. One could potentially argue that Loki was a part of a certain area all on his own, kind of on the fringe edge of what the Greco-Roman Isu would have been, and that may very well be the part of the world that he had dominion over. And then of course you go east, we know that Angrboda, who is Aletheia's alternate personality in Jotunheim, she is someone who lives east of Midgard. And if you consider the Holy Land, considering that part of the world was the beginnings of human civilization as we know it today with the Mesopotamians, if you go to the east like that, well, I mean, she lives east of Midgard. He's going to look for his woman. Makes sense to me, kind of symbolic, kind of cool in my opinion. I think it's a nice little tie-in here. Again, this could all be make no sense at all and be totally random and incorrect, but I think I'm a little bit onto something here. If Darby, if you're watching, let me know. I will be more than happy to hear your opinions on these connections, because I went full subject 16 on this thing. I'm telling you, I was looking like a madman. Now we know that Loki and Aletheia did have children as well. This was going to be Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel. I don't know if this is their actual names as Isu members. I did have a theory for a little while that they might have been human Isu hybrids, but I think that kind of falls apart because we do actually meet Jormungandr's sage in the game as Faravid in the Jorvikshire arc, as well as in the Jorvik arc for a little bit. So we kind of know that they're probably full-blooded Isu members. Loki also, through the animus anomalies, we can see some of his reactions were more so that of a father rather than someone who created something in a lab and is a little upset that Odin did something with his creation. Could be wrong. Could be interesting to see if human Isu hybrids could create sages, although I don't think that that would necessarily work just because you already have a lot of human DNA there. But who really knows? I guess this could kind of be explored later on as we go, but I do think that they are full-blooded Isu members. But I also think, going back to how Loki's abilities are metaphorical, I think it's the same case here. If you look at Faravid's actions, he's very snake-like in terms of how he goes about dealing with Halfdan, who is Thor's sage. He sneaks up to him, befriends him, gets close to him, is one of his most trusted members of his war band, but he's slowly poisoning him, and not in the sense of words necessarily, but actually literally giving him lead chalices from the Romans that are causing him madness, in the same way people like Caligula got lead poisoning and went insane during the latter days of the Roman Empire. It's a very interesting parallel, and it tells us a lot about who Loki's children were. Now, in regards to Fenrir, we actually don't know all that much, even though he's one of the central focuses of the arc that has to do with Odin and Loki's conflict. In fact, that's really central to the game as a whole. We know that Loki is very mad about something that Odin did to Fenrir, but all we see happens is that Odin locks up Fenrir, even though he would like to kill him in order to prevent Ragnarok or his fate at Ragnarok. He doesn't. He just locks him up, and in doing so leads to this big fight at the end, and we all kind of played through that if you're watching this video. Now, even though Fenrir is kind of at the central part of this conflict, we don't know a whole lot about who he was. We would like to guess that he represents a ferocious warrior type of creature who would have fought against Odin during Ragnarok and was potentially imprisoned. He's this symbol of evil, and we can take that from, of course, Odin's memories, but we also have to remember that Odin's memories are going to portray things in a certain light. Now, there is something called Indo-European parallels, and across many religions you can see the same story parallels in many different ways. One of the ones that's the most relevant is, of course, Jormungandr and Thor. It's a serpent-like creature who represents chaos, and a sky god who represents storms, who duel at the end of time. Now, we also see this with Zeus and Typhon in the Greek religion. We also see this with God and the Leviathan in Christian religion or ancient Judaic religions. Now, as for Fenrir, we don't have a ton of Indo-European parallels that go across the various religions. The closest one would be Ahriman from the Persian religions, who has a very similar storyline where he's bound and then consumes the deity who binds him. But I think one that is far more relevant, and one that I think makes a little bit more sense, is something that we actually see in the game, and that's the cult of Mithras. See, the iconic image of the cult of Mithras is the sacrifice of a calf or a cow. To what deity, I'm not sure, or if the deity is the one doing the sacrificing, that can make sense as well. There's not a ton that is clear about the cult of Mithras and what they actually believed, but we know in the game they're very heavily tied to the Order of the Ancients. And what I think is going on here is a role reversal. You see, this idea of a deity sacrificing a cow goes back to the ancient Indo-European religion that a lot of religious researchers have tried to reconstruct. Part of that is during creation, twins bring an offering to the deity, the Paterdeus, for sacrifice in order to, go about with creation. One of those is one of the twins brings forth a calf that they sacrifice for the deity, and in turn that twin ends up going on to become the first priest. The other one does something and becomes a warrior, but the one that I want to focus on is, of course, the sacrifice of a calf. This is something that is shown across many religions. It's not only the cult of Mithras. Christianity, you obviously you have Jesus, who is the lamb who is sacrificed for the salvation of mankind, and of course several other religions have this as well. If you think about that sacrifice, it could very well be a reinterpretation of Odin sacrificing Fenrir for some reason at Ragnarok. We're not exactly clear why, and the fact that he did that for probably selfish purposes, considering what we do get to see from Odin. He's kind of the devil on the shoulder of Eivor for most of the game. It could be that that is the case, and that is why Loki is so enraged, why Loki takes the life of one of Odin's children and whatnot. It could be very well a good motivation for Loki to be as enraged, and why this seems to be a family blood feud between the Isu and their sages throughout time, and I think provides a very compelling story that I would like to uncover, and something that I would like to know why it happened. Now, of course, since Eivor was able to properly banish Odin from influence in her mind, we may not ever get to see Odin's real side of the story. It may be something that we explore later down the line. Maybe we meet Hel, who is someone else that I have a couple of theories about, but there's really a lot of mystery here despite it being a very central focus, and I think it's one of the things that has me so excited about the next game, is to explore more of this storyline and more of this feud and what events were going on at the end of the world during the Great Catastrophe. Now, as for Hel, we don't actually see her mentioned. She is supposed to be a half-dead woman who is in charge of the realm of the dead. Now, I have a couple of ideas about that. Of course, we know Aletheia is put in the staff because she is essentially dead but is kept alive by the staff. Now, what Hel could be is the personification of that staff, possibly. Or another thing is, if you think about many of the underworlds in many of the Indo-European religions, they're not really the fire and brimstone idea. Even in the Abrahamic religions, particularly ancient Judaism, there's something called Sheol, and Sheol is just your typical cold, dark underworld type of area, in the same way that Helheim is, in the same way that the Greco-Roman underworld is, and in some cases you can actually go there physically. And what I think this is we're gonna have to go back to the Dead Kings DLC from Unity, is I think these are just the Isu temples people have wandered into, and they've seen some things down there, be it recordings of Minerva or other Isu beings, and they interpret it as a queen of the underworld, or this is the underworld, and they're terrified of it, so they think that when you die, that's where you go. And like I said about the Dead Kings DLC, when we go down there towards the end of the DLC, the raiders start uncovering some of these Isu recordings, and they start freaking out thinking it's demons or the devil or something along those lines. And I think it's pretty easy to see how that could be misconstrued over thousands of years, as humans of course stumble upon these places and potentially accidentally open them as they stumble across pieces of Eden and put two and two together. It would not be totally out of the realm of possibility that this influenced people's religions, and that the idea of this underworld queen is in fact people encountering recordings of someone like Minerva underground. Now, Hel could very well also have been an actual Isu being who was maybe in charge of like the medical field, or was a doctor during the Isu human war, something along those lines, or she had obviously the staff of Hermes that Aletheia is trapped in is very good at being able to replicate cells and keep people alive. That's why Layla wanted to take it down there to help keep her away from the radiation. So again, it could be the personification of that staff, considering we don't see her directly referenced by Loki or Aletheia at any point, at least to my knowledge. There are a couple of Easter eggs that describe all of Angrboda or Aletheia's children with Loki, but there's nothing all that direct. So again, it's a little iffy as for who Hel is, and we may meet her later on and see what she really was about. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of important mysteries that we need to uncover in regards to Loki and Aletheia's family, and how they may be the key to actually stopping repeating these apocalyptic events. Maybe Hel is someone that we need to meet in order to get the answers as to how to stop these events. Maybe they were the ones that ultimately helped these events go down because they created so much chaos on their own. Like I said, I think they are the antithesis of who Juno and Aida were, where order and control over the humans was their thing, and it turned out that that wasn't actually going to help anything. But in the same way, they represented so much chaos, which, if you remember Assassin's Creed 3, that was Hatham's big thing against the assassins, was that they would bring chaos. They wouldn't bring any kind of peace. It would simply be ultimate freedom as chaos. And that's what they caused towards the end days. They disrupted the order, and that may have been why they were unable to get these solutions to happen. Again, we don't totally know everything that happened. It's still a big mystery as to the events of the end days in regards to the Great Catastrophe. But I think there's a lot here and a lot that we can learn, and I think being able to discover balance this seems to be a theme that these games are heading towards, and I'm very excited to see how it plays out and how the modern day assassins can come together and try and figure out what the solution is to be able to stop these future events from happening. Anyway, let me know you guys' thoughts down below about some of these connections. What information might you have, or what thoughts might you have on some of the evidence that I presented today? I'm very interested to hear from you, and I'm more than happy to continue this conversation in the comments down below. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching if you made it this far, and I will see you guys in the next video.